All right, everyone. Well, welcome to today's Ask the Author. My name is Janie Adams, and I'm our History Engagement Coordinator. I'm being joined today by Dr. David Turpey, our VP of Publications and Outreach and the editor of the Journal of Arizona History. And just at the start of the program, I have some introductory slides from the Arizona Historical Society, and then Dr. Turpey is going to introduce our special guest. So some helpful reminders, please use the chat box or the Q&A feature for questions and comments. We're using Zoom webinar, so the panelists can't hear you, they can't see you. So to engage with the conversation, you can use the chat box or the Q&A feature. This event will be recorded, so if you have to step away for a second, or you really like what you see and you want to share it with a friend, it will be available on our YouTube channel. A link to the recording and a survey will be sent out to all participants. And if you enjoy this program, consider becoming a member of the Arizona Historical Society. Members of the Historical Society get a physical copy of the journal each quarter or so, if there's a bigger issue, when the journal is released. You also get access to all of the back issues of the journal virtually. So our mission here at the Arizona Historical Society is connecting people through the power of Arizona's history. We are a historical society nonprofit organization, and we are a state agency, and we were established in 1864. And we have 4 locations around the state to serve our various communities. We collect, preserve, and tell the story of Arizona's past through museum exhibitions, libraries and archives, historic sites, educational programs, and of course, the Journal of Arizona History. There are lots of ways to stay connected with us at the Arizona Historical Society. One is to become a member, get access to members-only content, including virtual back issues of the Journal of Arizona History. You can sign up for our email list. You can follow us on all of the various social media platforms. We have this really snazzy license plate, and a chunk of the proceeds of that license plate go to supporting our programs here at the Arizona Historical Society. So for more information about all the stuff that we do here at the Historical Society, you can visit us at azhs.org today. And just a reminder that this is part of a series, so we only have 3 talks left after this one for this series. And if you've been following along at home, please notice that the November Ask the Author has been rescheduled. So that one will be November 30th at noon Arizona time. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Turpey.
All right, thanks, Janie, and welcome everyone. We're glad you're able to join us today for this special lunchtime installment of Ask the Author. And today we are thrilled to have another recent Journal of Arizona History author with us, Dr. Christina Lake. Dr. Lake is the author of the recent article, Built in the Indian Spirit, How Mary Colter Sold the Southwest, which appeared in our journal's spring 2022 issue. And I posted a link in the chat to that article, which is available to read or to download from Project Muse. So please feel free to do that and share that link with your friends. Dr. Lake recently completed her PhD in US history at Texas A&M University. And she is joining us today from Louisiana, where she works at the Hilliard Art Museum on the campus of the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Lake and let her tell you about her research.
Thank you. And is my screen shared?
Not quite yet.
Okay, hold on, I'm on it. See, I thought doing this early, we would avoid these issues. Let's see. There we are.
There, yep.
All right. So thank you for having me. Today I'm going to discuss the article, Built in the Indian Spirit, How Mary Colter Sold the Southwest. So the essay that I wrote analyzes an early example of heritage tourism through the complementary lens of power and labor by utilizing Mary Colter's role in creating the modern Southwest. And I use this as a case study. It encourages scholars to refocus their gaze to see Mary Colter as an innovator and to delve into the understanding of her novel use of what would later be termed heritage tourism, and using that as a foundation for her methods and practices. Colter's work was a physical manifestation of broader cultural and social changes in the Southwest. And her career demonstrates the possibilities and limitations for professional women in the early 20th century United States. In addition to that, her work was part of this creation of the imagined West, one where Americans could escape the ills of modern city life and visit this supposedly less modern region. So cultural tourism stems from the concept of commercial tourism, which can be defined as this exchange of information on lifeways, customs, beliefs, values, language, cultural resources, environment. And though the Fred Harvey Company placed emphasis on authentically representing Native cultures and people, the company's main mission as a business was manufacturing an experience and generating revenue, which aligns more with the definition of heritage tourism. And heritage tourism is travel that's directed towards experiencing the heritage of a city or a region or country or space. And it allows visitors to be surrounded by local customs and traditions and history and culture. The concept of heritage tourism came into vogue in the 1990s, and it expanded into the 2000s with numerous studies and guidebooks on best practices for both public and private entities. Proponents believe that heritage tourism can successfully help preserve cultural and architectural treasures while boosting local economies by creating jobs and new businesses, and of course, expanding tax dollars and generating revenue. So I want to give some background on Fred Harvey, the man, and the company, since this is the entity that Mary Colter worked for during her career as an architectural designer. So before the 1870s, railroad travel catered to necessity, not tourism. Fred Harvey, a young immigrant entrepreneur, founded the Fred Harvey Company in an attempt to promote traveling convenience and also to commodify the cultural distinctiveness of the West. He brought Eastern Anglo civilization to an area that was unaccustomed to urban iterations of five-star dining. And in doing that, he employed women waitresses who were, quote, the most attractive, most gracious, and most attentive young ladies he could find to become the Harvey girls. So later, the company developed the Indian Detours that was led by costume couriers as well. The Southwest Indian Detours touted this authentic Native experience, and these tours were led by college-educated Fred Harvey Company couriers. They defined the social mores of the era as the first generation of Harvey girls did. And the couriers led visitors to the pueblos, and they wore this uniform that was this assortment of Western wear, as you can see in the image. They had laced up boots and Stetsons with small brims, A-line skirts made out of this heavy canvas. And they also wore this traditional Indian garb, which was this amalgamation of, squash blossom necklaces, Navajo blouses. And so while this Western wear might have seemed like this universal concept to Anglo tourists in the 1920s and 30s, it would have been incongruous to wear a Navajo blouse into a Pueblo community. And it's important to note that this touted authenticity that of these scenes belies the significant changes underway in Native communities as they confronted assimilation and exploitation. In fact, present day iterations and interpretations say that these tourists, not the Fred Harvey Company itself, exploited and often demoralized the Native artisans. In fact, the Harvey Company was later forced to discontinue some of the Indian detours because the tourists overstepped their boundaries by interrupting ceremonial dances. So as you can see, the Fred Harvey Company was this kind of progenitor of heritage tourism before scholars coined the phrase. And Mary Colter's plans reflect heritage tourism practices even more than cultural tourism, because they were calculated to inform the public and in some cases even preserve the cultural heritage in the community and in their spaces. And of course, again, generate revenue for the Harvey Company. However, arguably, Mary Colter's personal drive was to create a sense of place rather than generating revenue. So this question of authenticity surrounded the Fred Harvey Company and the broader tourism industry during this era. And often the images and experiences that visitors perceived to be authentic, particularly in branded tourism, are not based on the historical or cultural past. This brand may carry aspects of the authentic, but it also reflects certain aspects that are inherent to its own culture. So there's frequent criticism that tourism has had a negative impact on Indigenous cultural authenticity, especially because historically tribes have had little influence on tourism development. And so there are these profound inequities. Tribal communities have seen some benefits from tourism, such as the stimulation of cultural arts and the revitalization of younger generations' interest in traditional crafts. So ultimately, authenticity is rooted in time and place and reflects more on the individual meaning and identity. And the Harvey Company, particularly through the work of Mary Colter, worked to define its own brand of the authentic experience, and that was also based on something that could be perceived as marketable. So these images, symbols, and memories have become synonymous with the imagination and the lexicon of the American Southwest. So now that I've given a bit of background on the Fred Harvey Company, these pithy definitions and concepts, I want to shift the focus to the main topic, which is Mary Colter and her work. So this is one of my favorite images of Mary Colter. I like to imagine what plans she's looking at, where she's standing. I assume it's in the Grand Canyon because of the rocks and the rough-hewn poles in the back, but it's still just in that glance down. It's just one of my favorite vantages of her. So Mary Elizabeth Jane Colter was born in 1869 in Pittsburgh, but she grew up in Wisconsin. And her first job as a designer for the Fred Harvey Company was for the Indian Building at the Alvarado Hotel in Albuquerque in 1902. So her career as an architectural designer started a bit later than traditional for that era, but it spanned decades after. And Colter defied expected gender roles and feminine ideals at the period. She wore pants, she smoked cigarettes, she cursed at the workmen, she was a wild woman. And though her style was considered unorthodox, through this, she secured the nickname Old Lady Colter among the contractors. And Colter was responsible for the architectural and interior design of many of the Harvey houses and created stage settings for Indian artisans and demonstrators who performed their craft for tourists. And as a white woman who broke the ranks of a male-dominated profession, she not only triumphed over the progressive era New Woman views of femininity, but she also acted as an advocate for Native artwork and Native employment. And then as an educator herself, Colter remained a lifelong student, building on her experience during her work at the Fred Harvey Company to educate the public, which is a principal tenet of heritage tourism. However, despite Colter's trailblazing methods through her position in her profession and her unique methodology, it has been rarely acknowledged that she was employing a tourism and business tactic that was well beyond her time. With the exception of local coverage and internal company memos and accolades, she did not really receive notoriety until after her death in 1957. And though her designs reached a broader audience than a lot of other designers and architects during that era, specifically male designers and architects, we still do not hear much about Mary Colter. So in her approach to architecture and design, she placed an emphasis on placemaking as a universal tool for the historical imagination. This accompanying sense of place links place and culture and community and creates the ideal unity for heritage tourism and cultural exchange. And it's important to note this exchange is always uneven. The challenge in cultural tourism is to ensure that the exchange is as equitable as possible and that it occurs in a manner deemed appropriate by the members of local communities. And through its merchandising and lobbying efforts, the Harvey Company also created a discourse of Indigenous people as creators of the authentic. And this practice allowed for cultural change rather than reifying a notion of the authentic frozen in history. So Mary Colter designed dozens of buildings and spaces for the Fred Harvey Company. And in the article, I cover about 7, but I'm going to be only discussing a few today. So I want to cover first the Alvarado Hotel, her first assignment for the company, and it was summer contract work. And she designed the Indian building at the hotel. And the structure was part of the Fred Harvey Indian Department, which was responsible for all Indian promotional items and acted as this kind of part curio shop, part cultural preservation effort. In an attempt to create an intimate setting, interior lighting was dimmed and the visitors walk through this carefully constructed living room. There's a postcard image at the bottom right of the screen that I think depicts it very well. There was a fireplace and a mantle and a hand-hewn dining room, table and rugs and baskets, and they're all strategically placed to create this kind of homey ambiance. And in order to kind of collect research and materials, Colter rode horseback throughout the Southwest, making sketches of prehistoric Pueblo ruins and studying the detail of the construction and the composition and washes of the adobe. And she was also very hands-on. She would teach the masons how to lay adobe bricks and how to mix these plasters and washes. And she would even teach the carpenters how to fix the viga joints, which I'm sure was a thrill for everyone involved. So Colter used this hands-on approach to build the structures that embody these heritage tourism practices with the Fred Harvey Company. And through her interior design method, she cleverly crafted this turn of the century domestic hominess with this kind of exotic appeal. And I think it's important to note also that this is the first time that visitors are shopping this kind of manufactured home experience. Today we go to, a showroom when we say, oh my gosh, I love this lamp. That would look great in my living room. Well, this is the first time that tourists and visitors are able to shop in that capacity, especially looking at it with Indigenous wares and pieces. So because authenticity is ephemeral, Colter made selections from a broad definition of the Southwest and repackaged it as an experience that could be made more palatable for tourists. And she also used sense of place not only to create a comfortable experience, but also as a means to promote heritage tourism through her own interpretation of the region, specifically through connecting the visitors to the landscape and the culture to provide this, again, meaningful experience and revenue for the Fred Harvey Company. She carried these concepts of sense of place and, again, advocating for the employment of Native artisans into her projects at the Grand Canyon. The structures at the Grand Canyon are not only the most iconic of hers, but also some of the only remaining structures by Mary Colter. These structures, all located at the canyon south rim, demonstrate her melding of the natural and built environments to simultaneously preserve the region's beauty and make it accessible to tourists. So I want to talk about Desert View Watchtower and the Hopi House. The Hopi House was modeled after the Indian Room at the Alvarado. And so it included similar features: a sales room, a workroom, an Indian museum room with Hopi sand paintings and a ceremonial altar. And there was also a Spanish Mexican room and a room that displayed only Navajo rugs. And the Harvey Company commissioned Navajo and Hopi artists to live on site and create their artwork and market their crafts to tourists. And as well as demonstrating these crafts during the day, primarily basket making and weaving and silversmithing, the Hopi House's native workforce performed ritual dances in the evenings. So this added this extra stream of income for the workers, but also provided an incentive for visitors to stay overnight at the Grand Canyon. So I want to go back to the Desert View Watchtower, which was previously named the Indian Watchtower at Desert View. And it emulates archaeological sites that Mary Colter saw on her travels. And she was adamant to note that these were recreations of these designs. And in her design and construction of these sites, she emphasized the concept of sense of place. So visitors can climb the tower by a winding staircase and go to the second level, which is dedicated to the Hopi snake dance. And the Hopi artist, Fred Cavuti, who was then a young man, painted the murals for the room. And in the center of the room is a snake altar, including a sand painting that's kept under glass. And Colter claimed that the Watchtower is, quote, not an exact reproduction of any known ruin, but rather is based on fine examples of the prehistoric workman and is built in the Indian spirit. Full circle. So these sites and visitation spaces are very dynamic. Acts of repatriation represent the fact that heritage tourism practices continue to evolve. And in 2001, the altars that I'd mentioned earlier that have been on display in the Hopi House and the Watchtower were repatriated to the Hopi people. And most recently, Fred Cavuti's murals in the Watchtower have been painstakingly restored by his son, Ed Cavuti, and were reopened to the public with great fanfare, including a dedication ceremony. So I want to conclude with one of my favorite places, La Posada in Winslow, Arizona. So La Posada means the resting place in Spanish and was the last in a chain of resort hotels built by the Fred Harvey Company with the Santa Fe Railway. And it was the only one built that was had both automobile and train travel in mind. So La Posada opened in 1939, and it was considered this kind of oasis in the desert and hosted celebrities for several decades. And, you know, even through these attributes and success, it did not stop the hotel from being closed in 1957, and it was later used as offices for the railroad. So Mary Colter's dedication to marketing authenticity and Southwestern heritage is shown through the history of La Posada. So she not only designed elaborate architectural details of the Southwest past, but also crafted this elaborate backstory for La Posada to boost its exotic appeal. The exterior of La Posada is a typical Spanish style building for the 1920s and 30s. It has a tile roof, plastered walls, long portales, wrought iron window grills and balcony railings, and they're all characteristic of the Spanish Mediterranean style building of this era. And again, Colter used her old tricks to make the space unique. She layered the walls with 2 layers of paint, and the top coat wore away. The paint underneath kind of came through, and it would show this weathered look over time. And she would place Navajo rugs in high traffic areas around the hotel during the construction phase, which made the contractors nervous. And this was just more of an emphasis on trying to make the house look lived in. And the modern history of La Posada is deal for bringing the origins of Southwestern tourism into this modern context. So in the 1980s, like many towns in the United States, Winslow's economy suffered from economic recession. But through a local grassroots preservation advocacy, residents, concerned preservationists, everyone formed this nonprofit foundation and secured restoration grants, and also placed La Posada on the National Trust for Historic Preservation's most endangered list. So Alan Afelt and his wife, Tina Meon, who is an internationally renowned artist, found an investor for the $5 million restoration and made this plan to save Mary Colter's gem. And over 25 years later, this little hotel has become this catalyst, hosting local events and receiving international praise, and really becoming this revitalization movement in the area. And Alan and Tina and their team have really employed Colter's practice of sense of place. Each of La Posada's restored bedrooms is distinctive and denoting by the wall color and the decor. Fixtures like the chandeliers, bedside lamps are all framed in tin. And all the different rooms have different colored schemes. And they're also paying homage to Mary Colter throughout, such as the turquoise room that you can see at the bottom. The restaurant, the ceilings are painted 2 shades of turquoise, which was Mary Colter's favorite color. And they've also kept with several themes that Mary Colter envisioned, including keeping unique artwork from local artists on the walls, and even this idea of the lavish ranchero that retains this comfortable, homey feel. And on a more personal note, visiting La Posada was really what started my, my passion for this research. It was in 1999 when my parents and my little brother and my grandmother and I spent Thanksgiving in the recently opened La Posada. And apparently there was only 1 or 2 wings open at the time. And I was so enamored with the story. I met Alan Afelt, and he in fact gifted me this book. I don't know if everyone can see. It's one of the first published works on Mary Colter. And again, it just kind of sparked this passion. So much that I did my 8th grade social studies fair project on La Posada. And I won regional, no big deal. And these are some of the close-ups of the recently restored La Posada. So wonderful, wonderful memories. And again, on a personal note, I was able to meet some of the most wonderful people in this realm. This is Beverly and Burnett, who are affectionately known as the twins. They were Harvey girls at La Fonda in Santa Fe in the 1950s. And Alan Afelt and Tina Meon have been restoring Harvey houses throughout the Southwest. And one of their most recent projects has been the Castaneda in Las Vegas, New Mexico. And the twins have kind of become these local celebrities there, acting as ambassadors for their cause. And I mentioned earlier about the Indian Detour Couriers. Kathy Hendrickson has started her own tour company, Southwest Detours, and she does walking tours around Las Vegas, New Mexico. And this was at a charity event a few years ago, and preparing for the opening of the Castaneda Hotel. So there's Fred Harvey, and there's Kathy dressed as an Indian Detour courier. And finally, I want to recognize Kathy Weir. She is the manager of the Fred Harvey Mary Colter fan club page on Facebook, which seems like a full-time job to me. And she posts really interesting articles about railroad history, Fred Harvey history, Mary Colter history. And she's been this incredible wealth of knowledge and a tremendous advocate for the projects going on in these small historic railroad towns. So in conclusion, as you can see through this different evidence, the relationship between tourism and preservation is cyclical and problematic. A primary difference between Mary Colter's proto-heritage tourism and contemporary plans and practices lies within the type of spectacle that's given to a site. There's been this shift from othering with demonstrations at the Alvarado and the Hopi House to finding more of a personal heritage and connection to these contemporary practices. Kind of this shift from exotic fascination to personal connection. Tourists have always been participants in the heritage tourism experience and therefore are contributors to the production of the site. Mary Colter spent her career defending her aesthetic vision in a male-dominated field, and her legacy lives on beyond her architectural and interior designs. And there's this impulse behind merging what Colter imagined as the Southwest with what Eastern tourists experienced as the Southwest to what actually was the Southwest, and that continues to exert influence. Public historians and preservationists, among others, who work in the region still recognize her impact today, pointing to the lasting strength of heritage tourism and her constructed image of the Southwest. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic, and I love the images at the end. I always find it fascinating to hear about how people got into their research and see the sort of personal stories behind that. So that I was actually going to ask you what got you interested in Mary Colter, but you talked about the trip that you took with your family, so that answered my question. So so that's fantastic. All right, so let me see. It looks like we have a couple questions from the audience, and if people have more questions, please post them in the chat or the Q&A. So let me see. The first question is, you mentioned that tourists were a driving factor in overstepping bounds during heritage tourism interactions with indigenous peoples and practices, rather than the Harvey girls Couriers themselves. Do we know much about whether and how the Couriers tried to rein in the tourists?
There are several, diaries and stories about the Couriers having to, again, defy these typical gender roles. So as far as acting as these kind of pseudo-cultural ambassadors, part of their job was, you're right, kind of wrangling in the tourists. A really good memoir to read, I believe, is Amy Hurt, H-U-R-T. And I can follow up, David, with a couple of links and other supplemental information if you want to send that out.
That'd be great.
Yeah, so she was an incredible woman. She wrote for the New She had several memoirs. She traveled, I think, to like Africa and China during this era, but she was also an Indian Detour courier. And I bring her up because in her memoir, one of her memoirs, she writes about having a conversation with a roommate of hers at the time, and her roommate, and Amy is having this kind of existential crisis. Do we belong here? She was also, I think, from the Midwest. Do we belong here? What are we doing? Kind of infiltrating these communities that, were perfectly fine before we came in, and we've destroyed everything. And her roommate says, what would they be doing if you weren't here? Would they even be, creating art? Would they even be involved in what they're doing currently? You are a good steward. You're doing what you should be doing. So I think that it's a bit of column A and a bit of column B, and recognizing that, they're doing their part as educators and, again, as cultural stewards, but there was also this kind of displaced reckoning, and to the question specifically about instances, she, I think, does reference a couple of times. And there's a short film, and Kathy Weir might be able to, and I don't mean to call you out, Kathy, twice, but she might be able to say the exact name. There's a film called, I think, The Tourist, and it's a silent film from the 1920s. And it is kind of this theatrical play on tourists interrupting these ceremonial dances and these different situations. So, it's very romantic to think about an Indian Detour courier and thinking, oh my gosh, running away from home and doing this, having this adventure. But I think it would be a very difficult job.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. All right, so we have a couple other questions. Let me see. One of our viewer says she always enjoyed the curated gift shop at La Posada. Do you know who the curator is there?
I think it's a team. I know that, you know, and I called out Alan Feld and Tina Meon. I know that Tina does a lot of traveling to find different jewelry pieces. And she has new pieces and dead pawn, and it's quite an assortment that she curates. I know that Dan Lutzek is also involved. He's also a partner of theirs, but I don't know if they have one designated curator.
Okay. And then we have another question. Do you know how Mary Colter came to work for Fred Harvey?
That's a fun story. And there are a couple of different versions of it. The one that I'm the most familiar with is that she had visited a friend, and let me see if I can get this right. She had visited a friend and out west, and had been in a Fred Harvey gift shop. And then he reached out to her, a Fred Harvey representative reached out to her. And I think I have the quote in the article, and she receives a letter from Fred Harvey, or a Fred Harvey representative. And she says, "Fred Harvey, who's that?" And her friend says, it's the man who made the West blossom and beefsteak, and you better accept. So I think again, this book, and I can link it at the bottom or send it to you, David, at the end, I think outlines that. And Arnold Burke's work as well on Mary Colter, I think kind of elaborates a couple of those different stories as well.
Yeah, that'd be great. We can certainly send this information out to the people who are attending today. So let me see, in the chat, we have a question. Did Colter design La Fonda Hotel in Santa Fe?
And you know, there's only so much time. And this was supposed to be an emphasis on Arizona. So I think she's most well known for the La Fonda for doing the aprons, the iconic aprons that are very colorful, and was one of the first departures from the Harvey girls wearing their traditional black pinafores, you know, with the tapered sleeves and the white aprons. You know, they would have the colorful aprons designed by Mary Colter over them.
Okay, great. And also in the chat, so we have it's more of a comment than a question, but I'll go ahead and read it. It says, "I appreciate that your article and talk emphasize the bridge between Colter working for a profit-making enterprise and her serious support of and expression of, through her works, the Native American, Hispanic cultures, and of course the landscape. She was, in a sense, a corporate architect, but did it with excellence. She was also very much a teacher. Her buildings taught tourists about cultures and landscapes without them really knowing they were learning." So great comment. Absolutely.
Thank you.
And let me see, it looks like we might have another question in the Q&A. Thank you for bringing the story to the present and letting us know what has since become of several of Mary Colter's buildings. Are there any next steps for preserving Colter's legacy? For instance, are there any other surviving buildings she designed that preservation advocates are trying to save, or are all of the surviving buildings already in such hands?
That's an excellent question. So, you know, I mentioned I did my 8th grade social studies fair project on Mary Colter. I also ended up doing my undergraduate honors thesis on, I think about 13 Harvey houses and the various statuses. So whether they were extant or not, privately owned, publicly operated. So this was, you know, almost over a decade ago. And at that time, you know, it's wild to think about the progress that's happened. You know, I mentioned the Castaneda in Las Vegas, New Mexico. You know, that's only a recent acquisition with Alan Afalt. And so I think that there's a lot of change, positive change happening, but there are a lot of sites that are lost. There's an excellent site that I think lists all of the Harvey houses, and the Harvey houses followed the Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe Railway, right? So it ran through the Midwest down into the upper tier of the Southwest. And my research only covers the Southwest. I didn't deal in the Midwest. And of course, the houses were designed based on different regional architectural designs and trends. So, some of the ones that were, for example, made of adobe and then plaster and other materials that are more easily withstanding are still with us, even if they're vacant or not being utilized to their full potential, as opposed to, wooden structures. I can think about, for example, the Montezuma's Castle, which is also outside of Las Vegas, New Mexico. It's now being housed by the the World College Prep School, which is an international high school. So there's been a lot of adaptive reuse, but there's still such a journey.
Great, thank you. And then we have time for maybe 2 or 3 more questions. We have one more in the chat. So if anybody else has a question, please put it in the Q&A or the chat. So I think the last question we have in the chat is, where was Colter schooled in architecture?
That's an excellent question. This is prior to architects being required, 5 years of undergrad, different exams and certifications, and having to have stamped plans and all of these, licenses and all of that. So, she was not formally schooled in that way. She was schooled in drafting and in design. But this is, again, prior to an era when that would have been a requirement to be an architect. And, at the beginning, when she was first starting at the turn of the century, of course, trends shifted into the mid-century. But she did not have any, I guess we could call, formal training in architecture.
Great. Well, I think that's all the questions in the Q&A and chat. I'll just throw one question out there, and we'll wrap up with that, unless anybody wants to sneak one more in. When you were doing your research, was there anything that sort of really surprised you or just amazed you? Or sometimes when you're in an archive and you're doing research, you have sort of an aha moment. Did you have one of those?
Oh my goodness, not necessarily in the archive, and again, continuing this academic journey. As I said, I did my undergraduate honors thesis on the preservation of these Harvey houses in the northern tier of New Mexico and Arizona and into Southern California. And I was able to base that research and use that as my foundation for my dissertation on Fred Harvey's invention of the American Southwest. So I can't, that's a really good question. I wish I could have prepared a better answer. I think, and I'll say this, a lot of times historians, you're right, are in the archives and they find this, one scrap of tattered paper, and it is a aha moment. They had no idea that so-and-so knew so-and-so, or so-and-so died in this way, or whatever the revelation is. But I want to reiterate that my aha moments have been more personal, and meeting this incredible community of regional historians and preservationists and members from the descendant communities and artisans. So I think those are more my aha moments of creating these really and just beautiful connections with everyone in that community.
That's great. That's a great answer. And sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but that's a fantastic answer. So we did have one final question, which is an easy one, which someone asked if your dissertation is published.
Oh, that's a wonderful question. Well, I just finished in the spring, and that will be my next project, is transferring it into a manuscript, and seeing what will happen in the future with publication. So thank you for asking.
All right.
Guess we'll wrap it up. Yeah.
Yeah, we know you got to scoot, Dr. Lake, so we'll let you go. But thank you so much for joining us today. This is a topic, when we were talking a little earlier, we were a little surprised that, you know, people are so invested in this topic, but I think from David and my perspective at the Historical Society, this is something that people are really interested in. So thank you so much for sharing with us today. The recording of this presentation will be available on YouTube, I'm hoping before Labor Day, but in the next couple of weeks or so. And you can hear more about what we're doing here at the Historical Society by visiting us at azhs.org. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Get home safe, enjoy your lunch, enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you.